This is Move the Needle with Rob Kaplan, where we talk to people who lead, innovate, and inspire.
There's a real privilege of leading in the military that's such a mission-driven activity. In other words, life and death, there's a bottom line. Like, if you're not competent, if you're not good at what you're doing, if you're not good leading, people are going to die.
Today, Rob will talk to Scott and Kathi Snook. Together, they know a lot about leadership, academics, and family.
I first met Scott Snook over 20 years ago while he was writing a case study on Goldman Sachs, and he interviewed me for that case. I subsequently got to know him and Kathi much better when I went to Harvard in the fall of 2005 to teach leadership, and we were part of the same teaching group. Scott won the award for Best Academic Student in his class. Kathi was among the first women enrolled in West Point and in the first class of West Point female cadets. What was it like to be in the first class of women? I know there was a lot of media attention. Kathi, how did you experience it?
So for me, it was a great opportunity. I mean, I was a pretty serious student and an athlete, and West Point was such an amazing place to go to college, basically, and continue being a gymnast. I was a gymnast. I really didn't get it that this was going to be the first class that included women. I didn't think that was that big a deal. It just was a change that was happening. So we got a lot of attention from the press and from the other cadets there. So, I had highs and lows. I always, it was an amazing experience being there. I could tell some stories of some not so nice experiences, but for the most part, my experience was positive. For people that simply didn't want women there, I just let it roll off my back. So I tried not to take things personally.
Did the school try to prepare you and brace you for what you might expect?
Not really.
They just threw you in.
Yes. I think they tried to prepare for having women come.
Yeah.
And they did a lot of the right things, I have to say, at West Point. All of the academies had women come that year. So West Point did a lot of really good things to prepare for women coming, but you can't prepare for everything, and you can't prepare for the human factor. The women in my class, they tried to be the best they could be, and always sort of proving that they should be there, and just don't let it bug you.
What, in hindsight, would you say is a big misconception about what you experienced?
That's a great question, Rob. For me, the biggest surprise was and this sounds terrible, maybe actually reinforce a stereotype, but if you just kind of do what you're told, you can excel. In fact, I look back and say, if I had gone to Penn State or to another institution that wasn't the military academy, I probably would have flunked out.
Because it was so structured versus a normal college?
It really is structured, and I enjoyed the structure. And then 4 of our children went there, and I told them, if you just do your homework, you're going to do great.
And Kathi, for you, biggest misconception?
I'm not sure the misconception, but it is a decision that you have to make, that it will be structured. It will be a different college experience than probably most of your friends that went off to different colleges have. It was really tough for me physically. I'm a fairly good student, but it was tough academically. But I would agree with Scott. If you try to do your best, put the effort in, do the studying, do what you're supposed to do, you can really excel. The leadership experiences that you get at West Point then beyond the classroom are certainly well beyond what you would get a normal 4-year experience at a university.
Scott won the award for Best Academic Student in his class. They both were highly successful at West Point. They ultimately met late in their West Point careers. Sparks flew, and the rest of it is now history.
And so I got to know her as a friend first, and we were really good friends. And then eventually we weren't supposed to date because she was my boss in the chain of command, and you're not supposed to date within the chain of command. There's fraternization. And somehow near the very end, a couple of weeks before graduation, we actually started dating. And then about 2 months later, we got married.
And in the Army, if you're not married, there's no guarantee that you'll be assigned together. And so we pretty much had to have some very serious discussions about whether we did want to make the commitment to be married. Once we did that, we were able to be assigned in the same location.
The most competitive part of West Point, and it surprised me, I didn't know that was going there, was your class rank. And wherever you fall in your senior year, you get to pick your branch. There are only so many slots the Department of Army gives West Point for engineer officers or aviators or tankers or whatever. And so you get to pick your branch, and we both picked engineers. And then within your branch, I don't know how many engineers there were in our class, Kathi, maybe 20 or 30. And within that, then all 30 engineers, we were ranked from 1 to 30. And wherever you fell out there, you got to pick whatever assignments were available from the Army. And I picked Hawaii, go figure. That sounded better to me than Fort Polk, Louisiana. And so I was going to Hawaii, and I don't know really why Kathi picked Fort Bragg, North Carolina, but she was going to Fort Bragg, and that just wasn't going to work.
And I'll tell you, basically, because it's warm and I don't like the cold.
And so, Scott, you had to adapt your pick accordingly.
Yeah, so we were at the basic course together, which is a couple months right after graduation when you learn how to be an engineer officer. And we were there at that class together, and we were really getting to know each other. And all of a sudden it was like, wow, in a couple of weeks, Kathy's heading off to North Carolina. I'm heading off to Hawaii.
So you had to take some action.
Yeah. And so we literally called our personnel officer, and he said, as long as you get married, send me a copy of the marriage certificate. And, I'll switch your assignments together. And I went back that night. Kathi and I were sitting there, spit shining our boots. Kathi said, did you call branch today? I said, yes, I did. And she looked at me and she said, well, how'd it work out? And I said, well, I looked up at Kathi, and she goes, well, what'd you tell him? And I said, well, I don't know. What do you think? And that was my romantic proposal to Kathi.
Oh, that's a great story. I love that story. Scott and Kathi have a very unique situation, much different than working couples in the private sector. When they're assigned or ordered to take an assignment, they don't actually get to say no because of family obligations. They have to say yes. And so imagine two Army executives who each can be called on an assignment at any time and possibly at the same time, and have to make arrangements in advance for what to do with their kids, who's going to stay with their kids, how are they going to manage their household. And they don't get to say no, they have to say yes. How does childcare fit into this, and juggling all the other balls you need to juggle when you've got 3, 4, and then 5 children?
For Scott and I, we're actually legally obligated to our jobs. And as we're going through schools, we're incurring additional commitments. We can't just go in and say, you know what, we're done.
But your point is, if you're in a situation where you're going to get deployed, you cannot say no because of a child situation.
No, in fact, you actually have to have a childcare plan filed. You have to have a plan for, if you get called, who can be there in a couple hours and take your children, and what's your long-term plan for being gone.
In the final hours of the battle for Grenada, the Americans were still pouring in more combat troops who arrived at the new airport, one wave following another.
Scott was deployed in Grenada and was a victim of friendly fire. Scott wrote a very well-known book called Friendly Fire, which was based on his experience in Grenada.
In fact, when I was wounded, the Army had an antiquated system of letting next of kin know that somebody was wounded. And since we hadn't been in combat for years, my father got a call from somebody in the Pentagon that said, my name is Staff Sergeant Smith. Are you Luther Snook Sr.? And in the middle of the night, and my dad's like, yes. And he goes, you have a son named Scott Andrew Snook?
Oh, boy.
No, yes. And he said, he said, your son's been listed as a casualty. And that's the word they use. And my dad's just, poor dad isn't, going crazy. And he said, well, he's been wounded. He's going to be okay. But my father, as a parent, was telling me how tough what that was. And then all of a sudden we had 4 children at one point. Both Sean and Kyle, our oldest, are infantry officers, and they're both in combat at the same time. And it's much more difficult being a parent, having your children in combat. And you actually, I know if Kathy did it, but I literally would walk myself through, coming home and seeing a sedan, a military sedan in your driveway.
I would, when they were deployed, drive up the street, and there's kind of a hill that would go up, and we'd turn into our driveway, and hold my breath as I turned in the driveway
And pray you didn't see the car.
and pray I didn't see the car.
And we ended up getting a call when
Instead, we ended up getting a call in the middle of the night
where one of our son was wounded in combat, and that was hard enough.
Yeah. And as I recall, head injury from explosion. Yes.
So yeah, Ka he had 3 concussions as an infantry officer and was in a pretty kinetic environment for the first couple of months he was in Afghanistan, and he was concussed he got hit by a mortar, and then a couple of weeks later he was in a truck and got hit by an RPG, a rocket propelled grenade, and was concussed again. He doesn't remember that. And then finally he's moving his guns around in the middle of a firefight and stepped on an IED, an improvised explosive device, and it just crushed him. And his guys carried him to LZ, and we got great battlefield medicine and armor. And he came out of a tier 1 hospital, first rounds of surgery, and was brought back to us. And it was, and there's some guilt in that, because I think about, as a father, your first priority is take care of your children. And there's 4 of them that were put in harm's way, I think, because they were following their parents. And that was tough. I mean, he's recovered. The physical injuries recover, I think, faster than the mental ones. So he's suffered from some PTSD and some TBI. I mean, he's doing great. He came to Harvard Business School, and he's working in healthcare, and he's doing wonderful. But that's the hardest part. I mean, we always say we're as happy as our least happy child.
So let me ask you, someone who has been in the military and then is leaving the military to go into the private sector, what advice, and particularly leadership advice, have you both given to people making that transition?
There's a real privilege of leading in the military that's such a mission-driven activity. In other words, life and death, there's a bottom line. Like, if you're not competent, if you're not good at what you're doing, if you're not good leading, people are going to die. If you're selling snack foods, how do people, so there's meaning and purposes built into the profession of arms. And this next generation, Rob, as you well know, like, they want to find meaning and purpose in work, because they're spending most of their lives in their professional lives in the workplace, and trying to create that psychological safe place where they can find meaning and purpose in the business world is sometimes more of a challenge. In the Army, it was easy because it was there. You love your brothers and sisters. You want to take care of them. You want to bring them home. You're doing it for your country. And so it's actually tougher, I think, to try to be creative and figure out how to tap into meaning and purpose in different business environments.
All of a sudden you leave the military and it's like, well, what am I going to do? So one of the phrases that Scott and another colleague uses, do something that makes you sing. And I've often used that as I'm talking to people that are in transition or trying to look, or women who have left work and then they want to go back to work. And I talk about this, finding something that makes you sing. Yeah. It's just such a wonderful phrase. You really can feel it. You know what it is. You know what it's not. Mm-hmm. And you know what it is. And, you go off to do to your job and you're like, am I singing? And it's great.
Where do you shine?
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few other topics. What would you say is the most important lesson ultimately from a career going through West Point and then a career in the military? What's the most important ethic that you learned that has stayed with you all these years?
I really thought about this. I'll go first. I'm anxious to hear what you say. I mean, your core values. If you want to lead, you have to be absolutely clear about what's most important to you. And I would never tell any of my students or executives like what those values should be. When I say values, you said ethic, Rob. I'm talking about what is most important in your life. What do you value most?
Authenticity.
Absolutely. And then everything flows from that. Like, what's the most, like, every boss that I work for, every leader, whether it's a dean or a colonel, or a general, I want to know where they're coming from. And every time you take commands, like, here's what's my leadership philosophy. Here's what's important to me. Here's what you expect from me. Here's how I like to lead. And then, and not necessarily in the military, but in the civilian world, then people can decide, well, your core values are 180 out from mine. That's not a good fit, and we shouldn't work together, and that's okay. But leaders, the absolute worst for me is a leader where you can't get a beat on them. I'll take my least preferred leadership style in a leader like a screamer. Somebody's flaming all the time. I hate that. But if they're a consistent flamer, I'll take a consistent flamer any day over someone who comes in the morning and says, hey, how was the wife and kids? How's your weekend? And then 10 minutes later is just screaming, and you can't get a beat on them. So at least I can adjust, and we can make a decision and make things happen. So for me, it all starts with absolutely being clear about what's important to you and the ability to communicate that.
You said that way better about the values. I mean, I was thinking more simply like the honor code at West Point, you will not lie, cheat, or steal. And not to go to that, but just the fact that in the military, you need to be trusted. Your word needs to be true. People need to have confidence in you. So you have to work hard to be competent. Yeah. So I guess that is about values also.
Let me switch topics. Best parental advice you've given or received?
Well, go to the best parent first.
You just love your children.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh, Rob, I gotta tell you this story.
You just gotta love them.
I gotta tell you this story. We go to this little resort. I don't know if you heard it, Atlantis in Bahamas, and there was a couple of years in a row we'd take the kids down there before Christmas, and I don't know, the kids were seniors in high school through college or one out or something, and my boys are all boys, and they were in this suite next to us, and I remember we went over one morning. And we walked in, it's like a tornado hit the place. There's underwear laying around and socks and jock straps and empty beer cans. And we're literally like so embarrassed. Kathy and I are pretty, like, we like things clean. And our kids left this room terrible. And and there's a knock on the door and the maid comes in. And I was mortified. She comes in and I was like, I'm so sorry. You do not have to clean up our kids' mess. We're going to read this up before you have to clean it. This woman comes over and we're standing there mortified. And she gets between Kathy and I, puts one arm around Kathy, one arm around me, and says, Mama, Daddy, you just got to love them. You just got to love them. And I can't tell you how many times I've told my boys, I said, look, the love is unconditional. You know that. We love you unconditionally. Respect, that one you got to earn. And in fact, sometimes I just told one of my sons this the other day. I said, I love you, but right now, I don't like you very much. But that advice from the maid.
Great advice. With two boys myself, I'll keep that in mind.
Just got to love them, Rob.
Best leadership advice you've given?
I don't know if you've heard me teach this, Rob. It's the last lesson I teach in every program is everyone has an asterisk next to their name. I believe everybody is incredible. Whether it's a person sitting next to me on the plane or on a bus or the woman who walked into our suite at the Bahamas, I believe everybody has good in them. I'm going to look for the good first until it's proven wrong. And that has changed everything. I believe every one of my students has an asterisk next to them, that they're incredible. And I believe they're better than they are. In fact, every person who's gotten more out of me than I ever imagined I could, whether that's an English teacher or priest or boss or the dean, they believed I was better than I thought I was. They set high standards, held me accountable for them. It was tough love. I might not have liked them at the time, but they saw something in me and they truly believed I had great potential. And so for me, everybody I interact with, and I ran across this way too late in my life as a teacher and as a person, but it's changed everything. Every one of my MBA students, they have an asterisk. In other words, I just believe they're incredible. And if you look for the good, you're much more likely to find it, because you can look for the bad, you'll find that too.
If you think about the leaders that you really respect, and they have all the qualities and characteristics that Scott's mentioned, if you do something wrong and you're worried you're going to disappoint them, that leader has done something right. If you do something wrong and you're worried you're going to get your butt chewed, maybe that's, not. And it goes to parenting too. I don't want to disappoint my parents. I respect them and love them so much. And same as, the leaders that I respected, I never wanted to disappoint them.
20% today, something in that neighborhood of elected officials in Congress have military background. If you go back 30, 40 years, it would have been as high as 70%. What do you think the impact would be on the Senate, House of Representatives, our elected officials, if a much higher percentage of them had done military service?
I believe some sort of mandatory service, and certainly not the military. We have gone to an all-volunteer force after Vietnam. I would hate to be a leader in the military with conscripts where people were forced to be there, but some sort of service. I just wish every young person, had the opportunity to be part of something bigger than themselves. And
Right.
It doesn't have to be military. Then if they're a politician, they at least realize what it felt like to be part of something bigger than themselves where it wasn't just about them. To your specific question around politicians and military service, the obvious one is we'd have a lot less wars if our political leaders had to fight them. And then certainly if they have children whose lives are on the line, they think a little more deeply about entering armed conflict, a country into conflict. So there's a lot of ways to get there. And I think that's the most sobering piece. If you've never served or none of your children have served, that decision to not take that decision lightly.
Best marriage advice.
Scott's obviously done reading and research into in his field of sociology and things like that. But there are a couple of things that we've talked about that are pretty amazing. One is don't keep score. It's a really hard thing to do sometimes, and yet a really great thing to do. And so don't keep score. The other one that's very interesting.
Don't keep score means
I'm doing more than you, or you need to, I did this, or how many times did you pick up the kids, or even to that degree, or whatever. But don't keep score. And the other thing is, and he mentioned sort of this, but that you actually have an opinion of the other person that you feel they're better than they think they are.
There's this famous marriage study, Rob, that said what makes great marriages is, and when I share this with Kathi, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is why it works. I believe on every dimension that Kathi is better than she thinks she is. And for whatever crazy reason,
I believe that Scott's better than he thinks he is.
And that sets up, the key is that we believe, and we do believe it. I mean, she is absolutely amazing, more than she would admit to herself every day. And then down at a practical level, Kathi came up with this rule early in our marriage, and it's been tested a few times. You're laughing. You know what it is.
Yeah.
No matter, we have a great relationship, but there's times, right? She has this rule that we never not sleep
in the same
bed, we're in the house together. In other words,
under the same roof.
Some nights are like, what, I'm just going to sleep on the couch tonight. I just can't, I can't look at you. I mean, there've been nights like we've had a disagreement about something and I just want to I'm just going to stay out here on the couch.
Okay. Now, truthfully, we can count those nights on one hand, right?
Right.
Yeah,
but it doesn't sound like you fight a lot.
Yeah, but there's times when we've had a disagreement and we may go in the same bed under the same roof and
turn our backs
to each other because that's just the rule that we decided, and that's worked quite well.
I like it. If you had to give a suggestion to folks listening on one action they could take to make a positive difference in their community or in the world, what advice would you give them?
This idea of service, and we said it doesn't have to be in uniform. And so in my local town, I ran for school committee. And so I did that. That was my foray into politics. Not sure I'll go there again. But
did you win?
I did.
Okay.
And then good. I lost.
What?
I lost when she won because it was just miserable, Rob. Small town politics. You understand why it doesn't work in Washington. It's just so miserable.
It was challenging, but I felt like I made a difference and I felt like I contributed. So I had left the school committee, and so then currently, as I'm retiring from sort of my education part-time and consulting stuff, I serve on a private special needs school board, and I also serve on a local scholarship committee. Look for your passions again, and then find something that where you can give back.
For those who say, "Gee, I don't know if I can really add any value."
Oh. Everyone can add value.
Here's the thing, Rob. We used to discuss this at the business school. The mission of the Harvard Business School is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. There was a debate we'd have. What qualifies for making a difference in the world? I mean, does it have to be something, as you mentioned, something huge? I mean, Rob, your career, you've done amazing things, right, at the highest levels.
But it's usually local are the things you're most proud of.
There you go. For me, it's It's literally every interaction. This goes back to the people who are around you right now. It could be at a restaurant, how you treat the person who's serving you, a total stranger that I ran into today in downtown Boston that looked like they were struggling. And for me, that's how I think about it. I don't think about anymore, especially in the next chapter of my life. My challenge is to try to do a little less preaching, a little more practice in what I've been preaching in every time I interact with another human being.
So on that note, Kathi and Scott, thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your leadership. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you on Moving the Needle.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Enjoyed it.
Next time on Move the Needle with Rob Kaplan.
I was a Texas-born, Republican conservative, bicultural, bilingual dude from Miami. That may sound normal, but in Florida politics, that was different.
Just because Jeb Bush ran for president and was governor of Florida, don't think you know everything about him and how he moved the needle in Florida politics. Move the Needle with Rob Kaplan is produced and edited by Sam Zeff and Scott Richardson, and I'm executive producer Renelle Golden. We want to thank Michelle Brown and Zorik's team from Hello Studios for help with production and logistics. Do not forget to subscribe to Move the Needle wherever you get your podcasts and to Rob's YouTube channel. Until next time, this was Move the Needle with Rob Kaplan.